Welcome to The Spotlight, the podcast where veterans and military spouses connect and share how their military experience has transformed their lives and their businesses. Here's your host, Bob Louthen.
Hey, this is your host, Bob Louthen, founder of the VeteranCrowd Network, the network that brings veterans and veteran-led businesses together with each other and the resources they need to prosper. And you are tuning into The Spotlight. Hey, welcome everybody. This is Bob Louthen, host of The Spotlight. I want to read a quote about our guest today that I picked up. Jeff Minch is an executive Sherpa with an indispensable array of proven strategies, personal experience, and entrepreneurial kung fu that any CEO could benefit from having in his or her backcourt. Top-level leaders of limited or broad experience would be remiss to assume they would not benefit from the wisdom of the big red car as a co-pilot, security blanket, or utility infielder. Adaptability may be his superpower. Jeff Minch, VMI class of 1973, welcome to the program. Thanks for stepping into the spotlight.
Glad to be here, Bob.
Hey, Jeff, we've gotten to be good friends over the last several years, and I really want to talk today, about the last 10 years of your life. You have got a passion for entrepreneurship and a passion for consulting. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Well, on the tail end of being a CEO for 33 years, I had built 8 different companies. 2 of them were very successful. One was kind of break even. The other ones were just things that I did. So I left that experience and I was invited to serve on a number of boards, and I did serve on a few boards. And I was constantly finding myself in a quiet moment visiting with CEOs, and they were encountering for the first time things that I had done hundreds of times. And so I suddenly realized that I had a body of knowledge that was very useful to somebody who was starting out as a CEO. I was keenly interested in the venture capital business because when I had sold a business in the mid 1990s, I had become an angel investor. And so I was interested in that business and I was familiar with it. And it turned out that I got a lot of business leads from venture capitalists who would have a company that was troubled. And they would often call me and say, would you spend a little time with the CEO and let's get your assessment as an operator or somebody who'd actually done these things, what you think needed to be done. A venture capitalist is sort of like a guy who's flown 1,000,000 miles in first class. He sat right next to the pilot, but he has absolutely no idea how to land the plane in a storm. And I had been a CEO and I had done that stuff routinely. So a lot of these assignments were extremely effective. I was doing it to make money. I mean, I was charging people for doing this, but it was extremely gratifying. In life, we get paid with money, self-esteem, nourishment, and ego enrichment. It's very gratifying to me to see order coming from chaos. And if you think in terms of our mutual military experience, Army officers are basically trainers. And even when you have a good unit, you want to train it to be a great unit, you get replacements, you retrain it. If you're in combat, you take casualties, you get replacements, you retrain the unit. And really the startup world is all about training a business, an idea, transforming it into a company. And there's a lot of it that's extremely structural and mechanical. So I was interested in doing that. I've written for about 10 years, the Musing's the Big Red Car, and I've tried to encapsulate the experiences that I had. If you read my blog, you really don't have to call me up and hire me to help you because everything I know is in that blog. I've wandered into politics and some other issues in the blog, so there'll be some things that hopefully will offend somebody. But so that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. I've got a couple of granddaughters in Savannah. Austin has been extremely good to me, but I think I'll probably end up moving to Savannah here in the next year or so. And I've just tried to stay engaged. I think we're at an all-time high in disregarding wisdom. And what I say to people is that it's always cheaper to rent experience to ask somebody who's done it before how they think it ought to be done. And you have no obligation to follow their advice. The only thing in greater supply than advice today is bad advice. And so that's why I'm always cautious when I deal with a CEO. I'll say to them, who have you been talking to? Accountants can't figure out how to run a company for you. Lawyers can't, venture capitalists can't. And sooner or later, you're going to have to talk to somebody who's actually run a company. So for the last 10 years, I've gotten progressively deeper and deeper in that. One or two of the companies I've advised have become unicorns, have values of more than $1 billion. Quite a few of them have had successful exits in the 9 figures range. But you take as much gratification from seeing people making order out of chaos and bringing out of themselves what's there. I actually think that everyone has an entrepreneurial instinct within them. And the question is, what friction of life is going to expose that? And it's sort of like character. We really don't know anybody's character until you put them under the microscope in a tough time. And then the friction of life exposes their character and you find out what's there. And I think that most people have some entrepreneurial interest and talent. Now, having said it, there's a huge price tag to be an entrepreneur. It's like having, a wife and 12 kids. I mean, it's a very difficult undertaking, but it's also extremely gratifying. There's nothing more gratifying than going to work and thinking, this was my vision. I made this mission statement, and I've concocted this strategy, tactics, and objectives, and this company reflects my values. So in some ways, it's your favorite child.
Man, Jeff, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. Let me go back and ask a question. I want to go back to the roots of the musings of the big red car, because I'm sure that's evolved over time. How did it start? And now I love reading it. I look forward to getting my email, and there's a new episode, because I tell you what, you're pretty bold. You're pretty, there's not too many topics that you won't address.
Well, I started when in the advent of blogging, which I would say was about 12 years or so ago. I used to read a lot of blogs. I used to read a lot of venture capital blogs, and I had one in particular that I really liked that was out of New York. And I knew the fella, and I became friendly with him. We subsequently had a falling out over politics, and we're not as friendly as we were once upon a time. His dad was a major general who had taught at West Point. I had met him there, and there's about 10 years age difference. So I loved reading that blog, and I loved commenting on it. I think out loud. So as you and I are speaking, I respond to your questions by thinking about them as I'm talking. And so the same thing is true with writing. And so I felt for the longest time that the CEO was not getting the view of the world in the venture funded arena from the vantage point of somebody who had done it before successfully or had their interest in heart. So I'll get a call from a CEO and he'll say, I'm raising money. I've got a couple of term sheets that I've been offered. What do you think? Well, I've through the years collected probably 500 term sheets. And I know exactly what the venture capitalists will negotiate on and what they won't. And so I'll look at the term sheet and I'll say, get out a red pen, scratch out this. You want to scratch this out, but they're going to never give on that point, ever. It's a deal killer. And I'll go through. So what I realized very quickly was that I had knowledge, earthy knowledge, that was based upon my experience that was very useful. And I sort of needed a platform to get that out. I enjoy very much writing. I write short stories professionally. I've been published. And I like to think through the logic of a situation. In most instances, my view will be from a different angle or perhaps on the dark side of the mirror from what is the conventional wisdom. But I try and always base it on solid experience with outcomes that you can actually determine.
Jeff, you said something very interesting to me earlier. Also, you said that you think that our culture is suffering from a shortage of wisdom. I think I'm paraphrasing what you said. Why do you think we've entered into this phase where there's, I don't know, a lack of respect for wisdom?
Well, I think one part of it is just simple ageism. I had a call the other day with a venture capitalist, and we were talking about something, and I'd given him pretty good advice. And he said to me, "How old are you?" And he said, "I'm 70." I said, "I'm 70." And he said, "Wow, you're like the sharpest 70-year-old guy I'd ever met." So I wanted to tell him, "You should have met my father before he died when he was 97, because he was 10 times smarter than I'll ever be." So I think there's an element of ageism. I mean, America is a young country. I think there's a huge disrespect for our history. You know, you could take any political subject in the United States today and or internationally, and there's 50 years worth of history. You know, I get a kick out of watching, well, I don't get a kick out of it. I am sad about what's happening in the Middle East, but nobody knows the history of how, you know, Israel was formed and how the Palestinians had an opportunity to have a separate country, and it all started in 1948. So I think that, you know, the lack of wisdom is primarily a lack of diligence in studying our history. You know, I hear all these people saying, you know, that's constitutional or unconstitutional. I always like to ask them, so what provision in the Constitution exactly are you talking about? And how long would it take you to put your hands on a copy of the Constitution and be able to read it? And so it's just basic homework. And, you know, again, I tell you this, it's always cheaper to rent experience than it is to buy it, because usually you buy experience by making every possible mistake and then figuring out, well, this is the only thing that's left to do. And I know that because that's the way I gained my experience. Let me see if I can get this right. Um, Wisdom is the application of good judgment over a long period of time. Good judgment is a product of experience. Experience is a product of a lot of bad judgment. And that's basically where the wisdom comes from that we're disregarding today. There's no reason to solve the same problem by every generation. We should go back and look at what previous things were done, and we should follow the things that were successful.
What responsibility do our educational institutions have for some of this?
Well, I think that we have a basic disconnect as far as what the purpose of education is. You know, I want to hear people say that when somebody comes out of college, they're going to be a critical thinker. I'd like to know that they're prepared for some future that's going to include a paycheck. I remember when my kids went to private school, I offered to pay for a course in which the kids would learn how to read stock tables and learn something about finance. And my argument was that these kids are all going to end up doing well in life. They're all going to be wealthy. You ought to teach them how to read stock tables so someday they'll make a contribution to your school. Honest to God, you would have thought that I was talking about human sacrifice. The guy who was the head of the school was a Citadel graduate. And so he and I were on the same wavelength. You know, but just couldn't get anybody else on the board to get, you know, excited about it. So I think we're losing a lot of things that are practicality. I also think that the educational establishment is petrified by presenting any idea that is not totally consistent with their own personal views. And so, you know, in a discussion as to how the United States is governed, I have no problem with somebody learning about the history and the actual experience of communism. I have no problem with people exploring socialism, but I do want them to understand perfectly capitalism and our you know, representative republic form of government. I want them to understand all of those things intimately, and that prepares them to deal with what's going on in life. You know, somebody ought to give a course, doesn't have to be in school, the 10 things you never learned in school, but are going to turn out to be really, really, really important, like learning how to pay your rent and, you know, just practical things. And unfortunately, I think that you pay a higher tuition learning those things later in life. So the question I would give for all educators is, are your graduates prepared to make their way in life independent of you and their parents? And are they critical thinkers? Can they evaluate information based on data? Can they make good decisions based upon data? And if the answer to those questions are no, then they haven't accomplished what the overall mission is.
And now a word about a Veteran Crowd Spotlight sponsor. Cardomax is owned and operated by former Navy SEAL Sean Matson. Cardomax has designed just the right supplements for you and is offering Veteran Crowd an exclusive offer. Buy one, get one free on your first order. Go to cardomax.com and use promo code VeteranCrowd. That's cardomax.com, helping you achieve your max. Now back to your host, Bob Loudon.
We're talking with Jeff Minch, the founder of The Wisdom of the Campfire and the author of Musings of the Big Red Car. Jeff, I want to take you back now and shift gears just a little bit. How did you end up at VMI? How did you end up being a combat engineer? And then we're going to go down and talk a little bit about the lessons and maybe the disconnects of, what helps and hurts a military veteran in business and entrepreneurship. But how did you end up at VMI, and how did you wind up in the becoming in the best MOS in the Army, the combat engineers?
Well, my dad was a career soldier. My mother served in World War II, so I came from a military family. The times in the 1960s were such that every male was going in the military one way or another. I had gotten an appointment to West Point, and I got hurt. I was out surfing, and I smashed my surfboard into my chest, and I ended up with a collapsed lung. It didn't happen until that night, so I missed going to West Point, and so I was able to get into VMI. My dad always had a very high impression of VMI officers. He'd gotten a battlefield commission in World War II in Italy, and he said that the best officers he had ever served with were all VMI graduates. He served in the Korean War with a VMI graduate who won the Medal of Honor. And when he taught hand-to-hand combat in summer schools, he used to, summer camps, he used to always say that the VMI graduates would flip a guy on his back and then put out their hand and help him up. And he always thought that they were gentlemen. So I had all that as the prelude. I arrived at VMI. In those days, you took a bus. I took a bus from Asbury Park, New Jersey. My dad was at Fort Dix. And I was the first.
Had you seen the place before you showed up to matriculate?
No, and as a matter of fact,
that was a fun day.
I had never even explored it. Maybe you didn't have the internet in those days. I filled out the application very hurriedly. I got in. I was not the greatest student on the planet. And so I got in. I arrived there about 4:30. I was sick riding the bus from Washington, D.C. all the way to Lexington. And I was the first one to sign the book in our class. And it was a transformational experience for me. And I took engineering because I'd worked as a kid in construction. I enjoyed very much everything physical. I knew how to finish concrete. I knew how to put in rebar. I knew how to run a jackhammer. And so it seemed natural. Plus, I had taken 4 years of German in high school, and I hated it. And civil engineering, you didn't have to take a language. So that was the deep intellectual thought process that I went to.
All the decisions we make in our youth.
Well, the other thing too, though, is God was looking over my shoulder. I ended up in a great class at a great time. I had the best faculty advisor, Colonel Jameson. Civil engineering was absolutely the perfect thing for me. You couldn't, if you'd spent 10 years studying it, you would have come up with civil engineering. And it was all just guided by the hand of fate. And I almost
did Colonel Jameson work on his aim with chalk on with you as a target?
No, he was a fabulous guy. I got an F my first grading period in calculus. I'd never heard of calculus before. Now, just for the record, I want you to know I was number one in our class at the end of that first year. So I reversed my F. And he looked at me and he said, "Have you unpacked your civilian clothes?" Which, of course, everybody unpacks their civilian clothes. And I said, "Why?" He says, "You're not going to be here in another 6 weeks." He says, "You get 2 more Fs and you're out of here." And he said, "And not only that, you're going to be drafted." And so that was the kind of thing.
Good motivational speech right there.
Well, also, it was the language of my father. It was my father speaking. And, my father was a command sergeant major. And, he wasn't used to negotiating with his children. He just told them this is the way the cow's going to eat the cabbage, and you can either get with the program or not. And that was the way Colonel Jameson was. Now,
the VMI people out there love the jammer. I'm going to tell you, they love the jammer. God
Well, and
rest
the
his
thing
soul.
about it was it's all the love that was coming back from what he did. I had a great dyke, Bill O'Connor, and Bill said, if I catch you in the PX, you're going to the rat disciplinary committee. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I picked up a vibe that that was not a good thing. So he'd come by and check on me every once in a while. And I had a little room in the fluid mechanics lab. And I left right after dinner every night. And I went over there and I didn't come back until midnight. And you know, when you got nothing else to do and you're locked in a little room, and Colonel Jameson comes by a couple of times per week and Bill Connor comes by, you got nothing left to do but study. And so, you know, I liked the subject. I turned my calculus around. I made an A. But the bottom line is that the military atmosphere is the best delivery system for education if you truly want to be educated. I would have to say I had zero distractions. My entire life revolved around getting in that room and studying. And there were actually some nights that I finished all my damn homework 2 or 3 days ahead of time. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do? And I just opened the books and kept on going because I had nothing else available to me to do. I couldn't go over to the PX.
What do you think? Let's debate this. I've sort of had this premise, and you and I have debated it a little bit in the past that experience in the military makes you a better business person. Maybe some of it does, maybe some of it doesn't. What do you think?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. I was a combat engineer, company commander on more than one occasion. And the responsibility that I had at age 25 is far in excess of what any startup CEO has at a similar age. I had life and death control, responsibility, accountability over men's lives. I used to have a TO&E of 186 men. At one time at Fort Dix, New Jersey, I had Company D of the 39th Engineers, and it was a discharge point after the end of the Vietnam War. I had 800 soldiers, and they were waiting there. Some of them were waiting for a month, some were waiting for 5 months to be discharged, and I was responsible for their discipline and rations. They were all combat engineers, so they were sending all the engineers out through Fort Dix. I also had 100 guys waiting for their final appeal at the Court of Military Appeals for felonies that they've been convicted of. I had murderers and rapists and some of the worst people on the planet. And that was a hell of an experience. I got to tell you, when I was building high-rise office buildings, I never had an experience that was as stressful as that experience. And I'd get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had told the duty officer, I said, "Don't call me unless there's a dead body." And I'd get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I think to myself, "Oh boy." And it served up full measure of that. That was a difficult location. You were close to New York, you were close to Newark, you were close to Philadelphia, and those kids had nothing left to do with their lives other than waiting. The number one initiative that I had with that company was processing early outs. So you could get somebody to let you out 6 months early, but you had to have a lot of paperwork. I used to do about 40 of those a day, and I had an officer full time who did nothing but that, trying to get those guys out of the Army. Now, having said that, the draft was a great thing for the country. We ended up with a lot of people with skin in the game. And I think today, if you think about the military, the number one problem that we have with the military is it's too small and we don't have enough people who have skin in the game. That military at that time was 3 to 4 million people. Today it's about 420,000 people. So we had a lot more people with skin in the game. I'd rather have a draftee who said, "Yeah, I served my 2 years. I didn't particularly like it, but I know what the military is about." So all those collective experiences were great as related to starting a company. In the combat engineers, I had tons of equipment. I had tons of bulldozers and cranes and I even had at one time 3 M60 combat engineer vehicle tanks. And so in business, you're constantly looking at your assets, and I had to count for every single one of them. If a bolt was missing off a tank, I had to pay for it. And so I was, hell on wheels to make sure that all that stuff was taken care of. And then, of course, we had a real mission. We had a mission to go to Germany on a very important mission. We were located right next to McGuire Air Force Base. And so we had to be ready to go on an hour's notice. And so it was a wonderful experience. And I would say it was a combination of the huge degree of responsibility the seriousness of the purpose, the sheer magnitude of it, and the stress. You know, the Army operates 24/7, and every once in a while I think they snuck another day into the week, so it was hard, but it was great preparation for business. I would say every single thing I ever needed to know to run a business, I learned as a combat engineer company commander or as a combat engineer platoon leader. Everything.
We're talking with Jeff Minch, again, the founder of the Wisdom of the Campfire, Musings of the Big Red Car, author. Jeff, tell me a little bit about the Wisdom of the Campfire. Where are you now with that, and what's your vision for that piece of your life for the next couple of years?
Well, the wisdom of the campfire is, I envision sitting in Grafenwehr, Germany, around a fire with a bunch of old sergeants, old wise sergeants, and watching the wisdom being passed down from the people who've been doing it for 30 or 40 years to the young buck sergeants who are, you know, just starting out. So that's the vision that I have as far as what's going on. And I deal with venture capital, high-tech companies, and I'm solely on the side of the CEO. So from a fiduciary vantage point, I only advise the CEO. I'll get hired by a venture capitalist to go help on a company they've got a big investment in, but I only work for the CEO. And the CEO needs someone to be able to talk to, if for no other reason, to think out loud. When I had that company at Fort Dix, the person to whom I reported was the VMI graduate class of 63. And plenty of times he and I'd go have a beer over at the officers club, and he'd just say to me, you know, tell me what's on your mind. What are you doing? And so there was clearly a mentor relationship. It was made more special by the VMI connection, but he's a very experienced battalion commander of combat, well-decorated officer, and he knew everything that you needed to know about running a company. He was infantry, he wasn't combat engineers. So, you know, from that vantage point, I am a resource for them to learn. But it's very much a structural process. If a person has a good idea, so ideas fall into the category of either being aspirin or vitamin. An aspirin makes the world's pain go away, a vitamin makes the quality of life improve. So if they can identify a good idea, I can help them with the vision, mission, strategy, tactics, objectives, values, and culture. And then when it comes time to raise the money, I can tell them exactly what the venture capitalist is looking for and exactly how to do that. And I've had great success with all of my clients. I don't think I've ever had a client who failed to raise money. I work with some of the accelerators. So I work with Techstars, which is an operation out of Colorado Springs that has an Austin office. Every year, every semester, I guess they have 3 semesters a year, they bring on 10 companies and they put them through their process. And so I'll mentor one of those companies, or I'll be a resource for all of them. And so in some ways, it's sort of like going to Ranger School. When you go to Ranger School, you show up, you're pretty good raw material, you got to be physically fit. And when you come out of Ranger School, you know exactly what a 5-paragraph field order means. And you've made your thinking programmed. So I think in the creation of businesses, it's very critical to see the roadmap before you begin the trip. And I've got that roadmap down cold. I've done it plenty of times. I've helped hundreds of people do it. And at the end of that roadmap is the finish line. And if you do it that way, just like if you do what you're supposed to do at Ranger School, you come out with more confidence and you're a better leader and you know exactly what you're doing. Now, one of those teachings is that you never know enough. You have to be continually learning. And so you want to set your clients up for success by them critically thinking about every decision that they're going to make.
Do you have other folks that sit around the campfire with you that serve as mentors for these companies?
Well, I have plenty of assets. So I have a little email group. One guy is probably one of the top experts on cryptocurrency. Another guy was a fintech venture capitalist. Another guy started several businesses. Another guy is a top flight software development entrepreneur with some of the biggest names that you could ever imagine under his belt. And another guy is a Canadian criminal lawyer. So if I had something that I was troubled about, I would run it by them. The other thing that happens in the startup business is that you collect a pretty deep Rolodex, and you also find people who are very good at things. So as an example, I know a guy in Boston who's the #1 pricing theorist in America. And he gets hired by people like Neiman Marcus and Walmart, and he'll give you an hour of your time. And so I think one of the most difficult things for startups to figure out, if they're in the e-commerce business or the services business, is exactly how to price their services. In most instances, they price their services too low. And part of that is just understanding that you're not going to make every deal. So the deals that you make, let's make them at 5x, and the deals that you lose, that you were willing to do at 1x, those are not deals you should do. You should be pricing your goods in such a way that you have a penetration rate that's going to make your company profitable, as opposed to freemium, where you're giving things away with the idea that you're either going to sell advertising or that there's some better future. You've got to make your clients recognize and pay for value right from the beginning. So I know a lot of experts who can provide wisdom along those lines.
Jeff, one more question. If you are talking to a veteran who's becoming an entrepreneur, what might be the first 2 or 3 things you might give as guidance to that person who's considering that?
Depending upon what their military experience was, I would explain to them that there's no magic to the word entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is just somebody who's willing to take some personal risk beyond their personal means to try and convert a vision into reality. And that's what you did if you were a platoon leader or a company commander, staff officer. And so we've created a lot of mystique about this word entrepreneur. I think it scares people. So if you can run a lemonade stand, you're an entrepreneur. I also want to tell them that the leadership experience that you have of actually leading people is far more valuable than the business experience that your peers have who have been in business while you've been in the military. I remember going to work for a major oil company and thinking to myself, and at that time I had a degree in engineering and an MBA. I'd come right out of the military. I remember thinking to myself, I'm 5 years behind my peers. I was on the nitty-gritty things that they were doing, but I was used to running the show. And I was used to saying, sure, send me. I remember there was a project one time in Hong Kong, nobody wanted to do it. And I said, hey, I'll do it. I was single, looking for adventure. So I think that you have to also recognize that there may be a little gap in your business skills, but you have this unbelievable experience in that you've actually been a leader. The #1 failing I see among startup entrepreneurs who build a company to 15 to 25 employees is the leadership mantle. They've had no training of any kind at all. Maybe they've been a fraternity president, but they've had no training at all in leadership. They know nothing about the theory of leadership. And, a visionary, which is what an entrepreneur is going to take a group of people from point A to point B, where those people don't even know that point B exists because you're making it up. And your job is to get them there. Leadership is about that vision, and management is about making sure that the journey is a successful journey. Everybody's got water and chow and has a good place to sleep. And so that's what I think you start out with as a huge advantage coming from the military. You also are a hard worker. I never worked as hard in business as I did in the military, and that was often simply structural. When I served in Korea, it was 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I used to lose track of the day of the week and the month. I remember asking the guy one time, is this October or November? And so you just work so hard. So you got that as an advantage. And for some of the younger veterans who served in these strife-bound times, you've also had the personal responsibility of other men's lives. And I always say that a CEO, my approach to benefits is very simple. I think you own your employees' problems. So I always provided health care. Now, I didn't provide health care for their families and their kids. They had to shoulder that burden, but I always provided health care. I always provided flu shots. And my theory was that if a guy comes to work and he's sick and he gets other people sick, that's a tremendous impact on the company. So I offered free flu shots before insurance companies were giving away free flu shots. So you own the problems of your employees. That's a very military mindset. That's something that's drilled into your head in the military. It's not something that you have to learn. You knew that from the first day you were a platoon leader. You may not have known how to do it, but you knew that that was on the list of things that you were responsible for. So those were all huge advantages. In toto, when I would look at a balance beam, I would say that men and women coming from the military have a far greater body of advantages than disadvantages, and that the things that they believe are lacking can be picked up at warp speed because they're known voids and you can learn them quick. There's some merit in getting an MBA, but there's also some merit in taking some graduate school courses, even if you just audit them in order to fill in some of those gaps.
So we've been talking with Jeff Minch and from Austin, Texas, a VMI grad, a Army veteran. Jeff, how do people get in touch with you? How do you prefer they follow or reach out to you, Jeff Minch?
Well, all my stuff is there on my website. You can put my phone number up if you want. It's 512-656-1383. And my email is jminch2011@gmail.com. And, feel free to email me. I would prefer you contact me via email. And I respond to all my emails. I mean, sometimes I'll get, 100 a day, but I respond to them all. And there's plenty of folks that I'm not really going to be in a position to help. I do this as a business. And so if you want to chat about your business for, 5 hours, I'm probably good for 1 hour. And after that, you either need to retain me or, find somebody else. But it's a valuable service. And, I got plenty of testimonials of folks who have, used the wisdom of the campfire to be able to drive their business to a better place.
Well, thank you. We will put links to the musings of the big red car on the show notes as well. Jeff, thank you for stepping into the spotlight. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us today.
All right, Bob. Thank you very much. Great seeing you.
Great to see you. You've been listening to the Spotlight on the VeteranCrowd Network. We're bringing veterans who are making a difference in our community to you every week. Jeff Minch is certainly one of those folks doing that. Jeff, I'm going to give a big Army Bravo Zulu out to you. Thanks so much for being on the program. And that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Spotlight by VeteranCrowd. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and uploads, please visit our website at VeteranCrowdNetwork.com. We'll see you next time.